Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? One of the things I've noticed about myself is that over time, as I've gotten older, that I've tended to set the bar higher and higher for myself in various areas of my life. And so when I find myself falling short in an area, or thinking I could have done a better job, I'm harder on myself than I used to be. And this isn't always a bad thing. You have to be careful with this to not emotionally beat yourself up, because anytime you make a mistake, it's a room for growth, opportunity for growth. And I don't think you can really grow and improve if you're not being challenged. And sometimes those challenges are, hey, I think I could have done this a little bit differently. Also, one of the things that I mentioned very recently, I made a video response to Dark Age of Roleplay games about my ideal party, my ideal gaming group, and one of the things I mentioned was a group that was unafraid to talk to each other when they were having issues, when they had differences of opinion, if something wasn't working. And so I certainly have that here in the All for One Regime Diabolique group, because we have four very different game masters, very similar in some ways, very, very different in others, so different perspectives. And so I definitely got some feedback about the game I just ran, and it was not all bad, but there were some things that I got some feedback from people that maybe I could handle things differently here, there, the other way, and it was in friendly criticism, but stuff that I had to think about. And will this be a major paradigm shift for me? I'm not really sure, but there are a couple things I want to talk about here, which may there are areas I know that I'm weaker on, or that I'm questioning my game mastering style. Not that I want to change it entirely, but I realize there's multiple different ways to skin a cat. Maybe there's some angles I haven't been considering. So hopefully you can relate to some of this stuff, if you're a game master yourself, because I think we all kind of face things like this, and challenges like this in our game mastering career. And if you're not a game master, well, start game mastering, because it's awesome. Don't be scared by all this kind of stuff. This is just, you get into some of the nuances of how to play the game. So I want to talk about a couple things. I'm trying to put them under two different broad umbrellas. The first one is kind of like when to call for skill rolls, when to not call for skill rolls. When should it be the game master's job to say, here, go ahead, use this? When should it be the player's job to maybe kind of advocate? And then kind of dovetail this, or mix this in a little bit with my lack of experience, and frankly a little bit of uncomfortability with skills or abilities to handle kind of more of the social aspects of role playing. And so the other part is really about my kind of like my game mastering style, like the general approach I take to how I build a world. What does the world mean? What are the players' roles in it? Who is the star of the show, if there is a star, and realizing there's some spots where I may have missed some cues, or maybe there's more things I need to consider. So maybe a couple things that involve some paradigm shifts, or some new perspectives. So anyhow, that's a rather long introduction, which I hope is not going to be a long video, but probably will be a little long. But hopefully you can relate to this kind of stuff. I'd love your feedback, and hopefully also there's some people out there that watch this and say, yeah, I've had the same problem too, or whatever. Anyhow, let's get on with this. The first thing is kind of like it's not exactly working the ref, because I'm going to make a video about working the ref. I promised Dave Breon Jackson that I was going to make a bunch of videos about my little pet peeves that I mentioned earlier, and working the ref is definitely one of them. And this is not what I'm talking about. I'm just kind of sort of calling it working the ref, but it's not really. It's the idea that somebody that's just constantly very adversarially, always arguing with the DM, always our game master. Shouldn't I be able to do this? I have this cool power. This should work. Shouldn't I be able to use this ability? That kind of stuff. That guy. We all know that guy. But I'm talking about more about, like, there were parts in this session, looking back, having some of the conversations with the other players, other game masters, where maybe I felt unsure whether or not they should roll dice. Maybe I wasn't sure if they'd really have a chance to do something. At times, like, maybe I having the benefits of some hindsight, wishing I had considered maybe using one of these multitude of skills that they have. That's part of it, just an experience with running skill-based games. Also, there's times that I kind of wish they'd advocated, hey, I would like to make a Hail Mary attempt here. Here's what I want to do. Here's what kind of skill I want to use. And I think there's a couple of, at least two different skills schools of thought on this whole thing. But this is kind of tightrope act. I think you have to kind of walk between. And this dialogue you have to have as a player and a game master, because advocating for things like, hey, I think I deserve some style here, or the in-game currency, but also advocating for, like, hey, I think I ought to be able to use my diplomacy here, and maybe I can get some kind of synergy with my empathy. or whatever. Maybe I can use these skills here to achieve what I want. Maybe if this guy's getting away, hey, don't remember my move is much faster than his. I have this magically enhanced move, or I have these. Maybe I can synergistically use this skill and that skill, or there's parts where I kind of wish players advocated for themselves a little bit more, or hey, maybe you forgot that I said I was going to put my sword in the door. Things that I can't remember exactly why. I think I might have ruled against that because he might have failed so badly in his role to attack the guy. Anyhow, you have to watch that game. But there's parts where I wish the players had kind of like advocated a little bit stronger for why what skills they wanted to use, why they wanted to do that. And so that's definitely kind of a tightrope you have to walk as a player and a game master, so it doesn't turn into working the ref. But I don't believe it's always the responsibility of the game master to constantly come up with like, hey, make this roll, make that roll, use this skill. That kind of is a little bit contradictory to like my usual mantra of like, hey, if you need to roll, I'll let you know as a game master. But there's times when it's more of a dicey situation where I think it's okay as a player to kind of advocate, because sometimes, I gotta be honest with you, sometimes the game master is going to forget that you might have an ability here that he hasn't considered. Part of that also is, just the way I grew up. I grew up with games that really didn't emphasize or didn't have a lot of social abilities. Yeah, we used like the charisma reaction roll and what have you, and you could kind of be informed by the character's base charisma in something like old school D&D. So maybe they were better at doing a lot of social things because of that. Not Diet Root Beer. Did I have some? Excuse me. I have some Polar Seltzer Black Cherry. Not Diet Root Beer. Just letting you know. But this preponderance of social skills in games that I'm not used to, such as Ubiquity, it probably affected my my not thinking to call for things like empathy or negotiation, because there's a lot of skills. Now, I did call for some perception rolls during the game, and the reason I called for the perception rolls, at least as my justification. Once again, I'm not a huge fan of perception either, because of my old school roots. I'm wrapping my head around all these kind of things and getting more and more comfortable with them. But literally, when I designed the encounter, for lack of a better word, said, okay, well, pretty much what it boiled down to was there were some things I threw in the environment, some things about some of the NPCs, where I kind of wrote down, well, if they make a perception roll of this, rather they hit a very hard, or they generate 4 successes, they're going to notice this one little minor detail that probably would have escaped them, unless they were really saying, I'm going to look for this kind of ring on this guy's finger or whatever. So there were some things that they flat out missed. And so when I had Francois, say, a character make perception rolls as he's walking around the ball looking for Francine, it wasn't to find Francine. He would have found Francine without a problem if she was there. That wasn't it. He would have recognized her, eyeing a woman up and down, as Breeze Chorus wanted to do. They were for some other things, but I think being on the game master side, juggling all the having to remember all these skills can be a little daunting. So that's definitely something I need to work on. But I do wish, and I'm not sure where to put this because it is a tightrope act. I do wish that maybe the players would or had advocated for themselves a little more strong. Like, here's what I want to do. I think this ought to work. So just kind of one of those things where I'm not really sure, where I'm going to land in terms of school of thought. But this is also something like, as a game group, we get to decide, well, here's how we want to handle this. Because once again, we're 4, guys with our own styles kind of coming together and not only having to agree on, who gets to control what's the locus of control in the game, like, hands off this NPC or that one or what have you, because that's a whole different topic, which I have no experience with. So this is brand new. But more like the idea of like, okay, well, how are we going to implement these rules, in a more cohesive manner, rather than each guy kind of putting his own spin on it, which I think was part of the experiment too, is see like how would each guy approach the Ubiquity rules. Second one is more like my game mastering style, and had some interesting back and forth conversations, more like comments, but like with Sebastian and also with Anthony, regarding some stuff like this. And I was thinking about it though, like my general game mastering style is I don't necessarily take the player characters into account. Like when I design a world, when I design a non-player character, when I design a situation, it's not about them. It's not about whether they can win or lose it. I said, like, kind of flippantly, I think I have this Crom mentality when it comes to game mastering. It's the idea, like, this is who this non-player character is, this is his agenda, this is the way the world is, and so you're free to interact with it, however you want to. That said, in this particular game, having really thinking about it a little bit more, I probably gave some unfair advantage to the antagonist, to Julien, based upon what he was, rather than on his mechanical stats in the game. Now, I'm still pretty sure that I didn't self-will into him escaping. I'm pretty sure. Could be teetering on that, but I don't think so. And part of this is just the Ubiquity game system itself. Not, I'm really not knocking the Ubiquity rules at all. I like 95% of the game, the rules I really like. It's more like some of the conceits of All for One. I mean, like, without giving away too much, this guy Julien was not human. Okay, and so he was different. And so based on the fact that he had a demonic nature, because that's part of the conceits of All for One. I think I gave him too much credit about his abilities, apart from his stats, based on a couple things. One, based on my Dungeons and Dragons roots, and if we were playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess, he probably would have not had stats at all, or very ridiculous ones. But also just kind of on my, I guess the archetypes of what demons are like in a lot of literature. And so it didn't quite match up with these Ubiquity stats that this particular creature had. He was far less capable on paper, and maybe when it came to die rolls, how did they come to fisticuffs with this guy? They would have dispatched him. His manservant, different story. That guy actually, originally my concept for this guy was he was what you would call like an ally 4, and I looked at how he looked on paper, and I'm thinking, oh man, he's going to kill them all, and I dumbed him down to an ally 3. So I did change the game world a little bit based on them because I was a little afraid of a TPK. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I was still wrapping my head around or getting a feel for how these creatures work. So if I had one of the few problems, or it's mainly not a problem, but where I bumped my head a little bit with how Ubiquity handles things like like monsters, like creatures, is that they're a little bit less powerful on paper than I would normally think of, and so that's an issue. And so I part of the other conceit of All for One is there is one character, there's one non-play character in there that has no stats, and the game designer makes no bones about it. This is a guy that should the characters try to mess with openly, they will die. They'll just kill him with a thought. That to me fits the archetype of demon right away. And that's part of how I kind of envisioned this character. And so unfortunately, I probably gave him some unfair advantages based on who he was in my head versus what it really was on paper. Having the benefit of some more hindsight. I think I've said that 18 times in this video. Part of what I would have done in that situation was probably to say, okay, well, I use this thing in the book as a base, but I'm going to bump him up to ally 4 or ally 5 or patron 5 or whatever it is, and really kind of bump him up. Part of what I realized, having the benefit of hindsight as well, is he had far more resources than he should have, based on his stat block. Because in Ubiquity, pretty much the monsters, and this is one of those things it always ticks me off a little bit. There's like a stat block. Oops, sorry for that phone call, but there's. Oh, I thought I had my ringer off. There's always a stat block there. You have to kind of agree with. And actually in our conversation, the long conversation Anthony and I had on excellent video, which you should watch, where we talk about the Ubiquity game system. He talks how sometimes they break the rules in these patrons where they have far more resources than they should have because it suits a need. So I think in this case probably what happened. I'm hedging my bets. I say I did something right. But it can be very frustrating in Ubiquity to kind of color inside the lines in situations like that, when you have a concept in your head, what is this guy really like? And then, okay, well, here's a template. Joggle all the numbers down. So sometimes I think that's one of those things where I'm still trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, or a round peg into a square hole, or whatever the saying is. I think that's part of it, because part of my the thought I had in my head, as based on the demonic nature of this character. Him getting away, or him having some kind of interaction with the player characters, was a little bit akin to swatting away bugs. Not exactly, but if you played some other games where you look at the stats of say type 6 demon versus a player character, bad news. I'm talking about old school D&D too, not the newfangled Pathfinder games where you kill them all and all that 5e crap. I'm just kidding. So I think that's part of where I made some errors, or kind of, it conflicted with my game master style, and I kind of went off on this long tangent about Ubiquity and how they handle monsters, and how I probably was not jiving with that or meshing with that well enough. But I think part of it is just my basic approach to game mastering is always like, I'm not really taking the player characters into account. I'm just developing this world. I tried to put as many hooks as I could into this particular one shot. A lot of this too was based still on me not being that good at one shots, not really having a good feel for how to do that. I'm always the guy to kind of leave more like dangling threads, and I like I'm a big fan, and no wonder I like games like Lamentations of Flame Princess and what have you. I'm a big fan of playing a game or game mastering a game where there are just elements in the world that are they're either towing the line of where stats become irrelevant, or stats are irrelevant. They're just forces in the world which you simply cannot do anything about. Or you can, but it's very frustrating. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of ingenuity. That said, I probably should have thought of some ways and said, oh, you probably can use this ability here on your sheet, or probably use that ability, and I wish players had done that too. I'm back to that line of thought again. One of the things I thought of too is I'm probably guilty a little bit of violating the genre. It's a weird kind of genre because it's swashbuckling, horror, musketeer, supernatural, swashbuckling horror. But it's possible that I violated the musketeer genre a little bit in making the game a little bit hopeless or one. I hope I didn't. But here again, we're all kind of like we're four different guys kind of trying to make a cohesive game. And it's been interesting. So there were some there's some things that I really have to think about some more. And hopefully you can it's a long video me just talking about my own experiences, but hopefully you can relate to some of this. Where I have to think, well, maybe I need to take some more things into account. I'm not necessarily, convinced that the show needs a star. Who should be the star of the show? There's certainly genres where that's the case. So maybe that's part of where I'm violating it. Maybe I should give the characters a little bit more chance to shine, and a better chance to win against impossible odds via saying, hey, why don't you use this? Throwing more style at them, that kind of thing. I'm still learning to, I'm just barely getting good at playing a skill-based system. I'm still learning how to run a skill-based system, and never used an in-game currency-like style ever. I was generally always dramatically opposed to that kind of stuff. I like this, but using it on the game master's side, different than being a player. And I think you can relate to that if you've done both. But it's more this kind of game mastering style, and does there need to be a star? Do I need to take the player characters into account? And I know there's some people with game mastering styles or gaming styles, they're like, absolutely, that's the whole point. They're supposed to be the heroes. And so, once again, I'm not sure if there's going to be paradigm shifts, but there's going to be things where I'm going to consider things a little bit more. And hopefully we get to continue to have this dialogue. So as part of the day, I was kind of down in the dumps, like, oh man, I think I really screwed her, or, got people upset, or I should have forgot this. And so I think I'm over that now. But, I think this is a good thing, though. It's kind of, this helps you grow as a game master and as a person. So there's things I noticed. I was like, I can't believe I did that. Or, geez, hindsight, wish I had done that. And other things, I never really considered that at all until the other players said that. So, anyhow, kind of not as long as my other videos, I don't think, but there you have it. So that's some of the things I've been thinking about. So I try to make it not specific to that session, but that's what brought up a lot of those thoughts. So happy gaming, and once again, if you're not a game master, you're thinking about it, don't let this scare you. It's really not all that bad. It's a lot of fun and worth every minute of time you put into it.